The carnival lights flickered against the October sky as screams echoed from the funhouse. But these weren't the delighted shrieks of thrill-seekers. These were sounds of pure terror. Inside the maze of mirrors, something massive moved in the shadows, and the townspeople of Millbrook Falls would never forget what they witnessed that night. What they didn't know was that the real story began 3 months earlier, in the quiet suburbs where nobody expected a love story to bloom between a giant and the only person who saw past his monstrous appearance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Donovan had always been different, but it wasn't until his 18th birthday that different became devastating. Standing 7 feet tall wasn't unusual for his family. His grandfather had been a basketball player. His father worked construction, but Marcus wasn't just tall. His hands could wrap around a basketball like it was a tennis ball. His shoulders spanned doorways, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder when he spoke above a whisper. The transformation had been gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Throughout high school, he'd grown faster than his classmates, but everyone assumed he'd level out eventually. Instead, by graduation, Marcus towered over everyone in Millbrook Falls, Pennsylvania. The small town that had once embraced him as their star defensive lineman now watched him with sideways glances and hushed conversations. "There goes the Donovan boy," Mrs. Henderson would whisper to her husband as they passed him on Main Street. "Getting bigger every month, I swear. It's not natural." Marcus heard every word. His enhanced hearing had developed alongside his size, another unwelcome gift that made normal life impossible. He could hear conversations 3 houses away, the flutter of moths against streetlights, the nervous acceleration of heartbeats when people saw him approaching. The constant noise had driven him to near madness until he learned to filter it out. But the cruel comments always cut through his defenses. His parents, Robert and Linda Donovan, tried their best to maintain normalcy. Robert, a foreman at the local lumber mill, had raised Marcus to be gentle despite his size. Linda, a librarian at Millbrook Elementary, taught him that intelligence and kindness mattered more than appearance. But even their unwavering support couldn't shield him from the reality of his situation. That the breaking point came during the Memorial Day festival. Marcus had volunteered to help set up the vendor booths, hoping to contribute something positive to the community. He was carefully lifting the heavy wooden platform when a child's ball rolled under his feet. Instinctively stepping aside to avoid crushing it, Marcus lost his balance and stumbled backward into the cotton candy stand. The impact was catastrophic. The entire structure collapsed in an explosion of pink sugar and twisted metal. Mrs. Patterson, who'd run the stand for 15 years, stood frozen in shock as her life's work crumbled. Children screamed and scattered as parents rushed to pull him away from the dangerous giant. "He did that on purpose," someone shouted from the crowd. "Look at the size of him, he's a menace." Marcus knelt in the wreckage, desperately trying to salvage what he could, his massive hands shaking as he picked up bent metal poles and torn fabric. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Patterson," he rumbled, his voice carrying across the silent festival. "Grounds, please let me pay for everything. I'll fix it, I promise." But Mrs. Patterson just stared at him with fear in her eyes, the same fear he'd been seeing more and more lately. The crowd pressed closer, their voices rising in anger and suspicion. "This is what happens when things get too big," Mayor Fitzgerald declared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Nature has limits, and when they're exceeded, people get hurt." That night, Marcus locked himself in his bedroom and stared at his reflection in the mirror his father had specially mounted 8 feet up the wall. His features had grown harsh and angular, his brow heavy, his jaw squared like carved stone. Combined with his towering frame, he understood why people called him monstrous. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sophia Chun stood on the Donovan family's reinforced porch, her petite frame dwarfed by the oversized doorway Marcus's father had installed. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, with long black hair that caught the morning sunlight and eyes that held. No trace of the fear Marcus had grown accustomed to. "You must be Marcus," she said when he answered the door, her voice clear and confident. "I'm Sophia. I just moved here from San Francisco to teach at the high school. I heard about what happened at the festival." Marcus instinctively stepped back, his shoulders hunching as he tried to make himself smaller. "If you're here to tell me to stay away from town events, you don't need to worry. I already decided that myself." Sophia tilted her head, studying him with curiosity rather than fear. "Actually, I'm here because I think you're being treated unfairly. I've seen the aftermath of real destruction, Marcus. What happened yesterday was an accident, and anyone with half a brain could see that." The words hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had defended him? When was the last time someone had looked at him without seeing a threat first? "You don't understand," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am dangerous. Every day I get stronger, bigger. I can't control it anymore. Yesterday, I almost hurt people." Sophia stepped closer, and Marcus was amazed that she didn't flinch when he loomed over her. "Can I tell you something? In San Francisco, I worked with special needs kids, including several with gigantism. What you're experiencing, the continued growth, the enhanced senses, the physical changes, it's a medical condition, not a curse." Marcus blinked, processing this information. Medical condition? Acromegaly, possibly, or another form of growth hormone excess. "It's treatable, Marcus. There are doctors who specialize in exactly what you're going through." She pulled out a business card. "Dr. Elizabeth Morrison at Pittsburgh General. She's one of the best endocrinologists in the state." For the first time in months, Marcus felt something other than despair. Hope was a dangerous emotion, he'd learned that the hard way, but Sophia's matter-of-fact tone and genuine concern made it impossible to dismiss. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Sophia smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Because I've been the outsider too. I know what it's like when people decide who you are before they get to know you. Plus, I have a theory about monsters and beauty that I'd like to test." Over the following weeks, Sophia became a constant presence in Marcus's life. She accompanied him to his first appointment with Dr. Morrison, where blood tests and MRI scans confirmed her initial assessment. The doctor prescribed medication to regulate his hormone levels and outlined a treatment plan that would stabilize his growth and reduce some of the more severe symptoms. But more importantly, Sophia saw past his physical appearance to the person underneath. She discovered that Marcus was an avid reader who devoured every book in the local library's science fiction section. She learned about his dreams of becoming an engineer, dreams he'd abandoned when his condition made college seem impossible. She found out that he'd been secretly volunteering at the animal shelter, using his size and strength to help with the larger rescue dogs that other volunteers couldn't handle. "The animals don't see a monster," Marcus explained one evening, as they walked through the woods behind his house, the only place he could move freely without drawing stares. "They see someone who can lift heavy things and has gentle hands. Sometimes I think they understand me better than people do." Sophia watched him carefully navigate around low-hanging branches, his massive form moving with surprising grace through the forest. Maybe that's because animals judge by actions, not appearances. They know you're safe because of how you behave, not how you look. Their friendship deepened as summer progressed. Sophia helped Marcus prepare for his GED so he could apply to community college, while he assisted her in setting up her new classroom. She was amazed by his intelligence and creativity, while he marveled at her fearlessness and determination to see good in everyone. The town, however, remained suspicious. Marcus's medical treatment was helping his growth had stabilized, and the medication was slowly returning his features to more normal proportions. But change took time, and people's perceptions changed even more slowly. "That teacher of yours," is making the mistake, Marcus overheard Mayor Fitzgerald tell his deputy one afternoon. Getting too close to something dangerous. Mark my words, it'll end badly for everyone involved. The criticism hurt, but Sophia dismissed it with characteristic determination. Small minds always fear what they don't understand, she told Marcus. But fear can be overcome with knowledge and compassion. We just have to be patient. Marcus wanted to believe her, but 18 years of being different had taught him that patience didn't always pay off. Still, for the first time since his transformation began, he had something worth fighting for, not just his own future, but a relationship with someone who saw him as more than a monster. The real test came in August, when Sophia suggested they attend the Millbrook Falls Summer Concert Series together. The weekly outdoor concerts were a beloved town tradition, drawing families and couples to the park pavilion every Thursday evening. I don't think that's a good idea, Marcus said, his stomach knotting at the thought of all those people staring at them. People will talk. People are already talking, Sophia replied practically. The question is whether we let their gossip control our lives, or whether we show them that there's nothing to be afraid of. The night of the concert, Marcus dressed carefully in his best clothes, specially tailored by Mrs. Kowalski, the only seamstress in town brave enough to take his measurements. Sophia met him at the edge of the park, wearing a simple blue sundress. That made her eyes sparkle in the evening light. As they walked toward the pavilion, conversation gradually died around them. Families turned to stare, children whispered to their parents, and more than one person pulled out their phone to record the spectacle of beauty and the beast walking hand in hand through their quiet town. Marcus's enhanced hearing picked up every cruel comment, every expression of disgust and fear. His steps faltered as the weight of their judgment pressed down on him. "They're all looking at us," he murmured to Sophia. She squeezed his hand, her small fingers barely wrapping around his palm, and smiled up at him. "Let them look. We have nothing to hide." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They found a spot on the grass near the back of the crowd, Marcus sitting cross-legged, to reduce his imposing height while Sophia settled beside him. The local band was playing classic rock covers, and despite the stares and whispers, Marcus found himself relaxing as the music washed over them. But their peace was shattered when Tyler Brooks, a local mechanic with a reputation for causing trouble, approached them during the intermission. Well, Tyler drawled, loud enough for half the crowd to hear. "Look what we have here. The new teacher and her pet monster. Tell me, sweetheart, what's it like dating King Kong?" Marcus tensed, his hands clenching into fists. He could feel the familiar anger building, the same rage that had been growing alongside his body, fueled by months of insults and isolation. But before he could respond, Sophia stood up, her small frame radiating fierce protectiveness. "What's it like being so insecure that you have to attack people who are different from you?" She shot back, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent park. "Marcus has more dignity in his little finger than you have in your entire body, Tyler Brooks." Tyler's face reddened. "You don't know what you're dealing with, lady. That thing is dangerous. One day he's going to snap and hurt someone, and it'll be your fault for encouraging him." The crowd murmured agreement, and Marcus felt the weight of their collective fear pressing down on him. Maybe Tyler was right. Maybe he was fooling himself, thinking he could ever be anything other than the monster they all believed him to be. But then Sophia turned to face the crowd, her voice ringing with conviction. "You want to know what's dangerous? Ignorance is dangerous. Prejudice is dangerous. Fear is dangerous." She gestured to Marcus, who was still sitting motionlessly on the grass, his head bowed under their scrutiny. "This man volunteers at the animal shelter every weekend. He's reading medical textbooks to become a physician's assistant so he can help other people with growth disorders. He carried Mrs. Peterson's groceries to her car last week when her arthritis was acting up. Marcus looked up in surprise. He hadn't realized she'd seen him helping Mrs. Peterson. Sophia continued, her voice growing stronger. You call him a monster because he's different, because he's bigger and stronger than you. But the only monsters I see are the people who judge others based on appearance instead of character. The park fell silent except for the sound of cicadas in the nearby trees. Then, slowly, a few people began to murmur among themselves. Marcus caught fragments of their conversations with his enhanced hearing, some still expressing fear and suspicion, but others questioning whether they'd been too harsh in their judgment. Mrs. Peterson herself stood up from her lawn chair near the front of the crowd. The elderly woman walked slowly toward them, her cane tapping against the pavement. Marcus held his breath, expecting another confrontation. Instead, she stopped in front of him and looked up at his towering form with tired but kind eyes. Young man, she said in her quavery voice, I never properly thanked you for your help last week. My groceries would still be sitting in that parking lot if you hadn't come along. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. It was nothing, Mrs. Peterson. Anyone would have done the same thing. She shook her head. No, they wouldn't have. I sat there for 20 minutes watching people walk by before you stopped to help. She turned to address the crowd. This boy has a good heart. Maybe it's time we started seeing that instead of being afraid of what we don't understand. The weeks following the concert brought unexpected changes to Millbrook Falls. Mrs. Peterson's public support had cracked open something in the town's consciousness, creating space for doubt where certainty had once lived. Not everyone was ready to embrace Marcus, but the absolute hostility began to soften into cautious curiosity. Dr. Morrison's treatment was working better than anyone had expected. Marcus's facial features were gradually returning to more human proportions, and while he remained impressively large, the monstrous distortions that had frightened people were fading. More importantly, his confidence was growing alongside Sophia's unwavering belief in him. They developed routines that felt dangerously close to normal. Tuesday evenings found them at the library, where Sophia helped Marcus prepare for his community college entrance exams. Thursdays they volunteered together at the animal shelter, where Marcus had become indispensable for handling the large breed rescues. Weekends meant long walks in the woods, talking about everything from quantum physics to favorite movies. But normalcy in Millbrook Falls was fragile, and Marcus should have known it wouldn't last. The trouble started with Jeremy Walsh, a newcomer who'd moved to town in late August to take over his deceased uncle's hardware store. Unlike the locals who'd watched Marcus grow up, Jeremy had no context for understanding the gentle giant who walked their streets. All he saw was a potential threat to his business and his family. I'm not comfortable with that thing coming into my store, Jeremy told Mayor Fitzgerald during a town council meeting in September. What if he has another one of his episodes and destroys my inventory? Who's going to pay for that? Marcus hadn't even been in Jeremy's store yet, but facts seemed irrelevant when fear was driving the conversation. The mayor, always sensitive to the concerns of business owners, promised to look into the situation. The investigation came in the form of Officer Dennis Parker, a decent man who'd known Marcus since childhood but was bound by duty to follow up on complaints. He appeared at the Donovan house on a crisp October morning, his patrol car drawing curious neighbors to their windows. "Morning, Marcus," Parker said uncomfortably. "I need to ask you a few questions about your activities around town. There've been some concerns raised." Linda Donovan emerged from the kitchen, her librarian instincts immediately defensive. "What kind of concerns, Dennis? Marcus hasn't done anything wrong." Parker shifted his weight, clearly unhappy with his assignment. "I know that, Linda, but..." Jeremy Walsh filed a formal complaint about potential property damage, and the mayor wants everything documented. "Marcus, can you account for your whereabouts last Tuesday evening?" The absurdity of it hit Marcus like a physical blow. "I was at the library with Sophia, studying for my college entrance exams. Mrs. Hartwell was there the entire time. And Thursday? Animal shelter, same as every Thursday. Dr. Reynolds can verify that. Parker scribbled notes he clearly didn't want to write. Look, Marcus, I have to ask this. Have you been experiencing any episodes of uncontrolled anger or violent impulses? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Marcus felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble again. Even with medical treatment, even with Sophia's support, even with growing acceptance from some townspeople, he was still being treated like a ticking time bomb. No, Marcus said quietly. The medication has stabilized my hormone levels. Dr. Morrison can provide documentation if you need it. After Parker left, Marcus sat in his bedroom staring out the window at the town he'd called home his entire life. The investigation felt like a betrayal, a reminder that no matter how much he changed or how hard he tried to integrate, there would always be people who saw him as dangerous first and human second. Sophia found him there when she arrived for their usual study session. She took one look at his expression and immediately understood. They came to question you, Officer Parker. Jeremy Walsh filed a complaint about potential property damage. I haven't even been in his store. Marcus's voice carried a bitter edge that Sophia had never heard before. Maybe I should just leave Sophia. Go somewhere bigger where I won't stand out so much. Running away won't solve anything, Sophia said firmly, settling beside him on the reinforced chair his father had built. Besides, you have college applications pending, medical treatment that's working, and people here who care about you. A few people, Marcus corrected. Most of them still see a monster when they look at me. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her mind working. When she finally spoke, her voice held a determined edge he recognized. Then, maybe it's time to show them something they can't ignore. Her plan was audacious and terrifying in equal measure. The annual Harvest Festival was Millbrook Falls' biggest event, drawing visitors from surrounding towns for 3 days of food, crafts, and entertainment. The centerpiece was always the strongman competition, where local men showed off by lifting weights, pulling trucks, and competing in feats of strength. You should enter, Sophia announced over dinner at the local diner, speaking loudly enough for other patrons to hear. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. Absolutely not. Can you imagine the spectacle? It would be like sending a professional boxer to fight children. Exactly. You'd win easily, and winning changes everything. Instead of being the dangerous unknown, you'd be the hometown champion. People love winners, Marcus, especially when those winners represent their community. The idea was simultaneously brilliant and terrifying. Marcus could easily dominate any physical competition, but public displays of his strength had always backfired. The Memorial Day disaster was still fresh in everyone's memory. What if something goes wrong? What if I hurt someone? Then we make sure nothing goes wrong. We plan every detail, practice beforehand, and show everyone that your strength can be controlled and used positively. Sophia reached across the table and took his hand, ignoring the curious stares from other diners. Trust me on this, Marcus. Sometimes the only way through fear is directly through it. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Marcus trained carefully, practicing precise control rather than maximum effort. Sophia researched the competition format and rules, ensuring there would be no surprises. They even convinced Dr. Morrison to attend as a medical supervisor, adding legitimacy to Marcus's participation. The night before the festival, Marcus stood in his backyard practicing the truck pull one final time. The borrowed pickup moved easily. Behind him, like a child's toy rather than 3 tons of steel and glass. His enhanced strength made the competition almost comically unfair. But Sophia was right. Winning would change the narrative from dangerous monster to hometown hero. You're going to do great tomorrow, Sophia said, joining him in the yard. She'd been quieter than usual lately, and Marcus wondered if she was having second thoughts about her plan. Are you worried I'll embarrass us? Never. I'm worried about what happens after you win. She looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Success is going to change things, Marcus. People are going to see you differently, treat you differently. I just want to make sure we're ready for that. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. What do you mean? I mean that right now, I'm the only person who really knows you. Tomorrow you might become everyone's hero. Heroes don't get to be human anymore. They have to be perfect all the time. The morning of the harvest festival dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn sky that made everything look like a postcard. Main Street was transformed with orange and gold decorations. Vendor booths lined the sidewalks, and the scent of apple cider and funnel cake filled the air. Marcus arrived early, hoping to avoid the crowds, but word of his participation had spread. A sizable gathering had already formed around the competition area, and Marcus could feel the weight of their expectations and fears pressing down on him. Jeremy Walsh stood at the front of the crowd, his arms crossed and his expression skeptical. "This should be interesting," he said loudly. "Let's see what the giant can really do." The other competitors were local men Marcus had known for years: construction workers, farmers, and mechanics who represented the backbone of Millbrook Falls. They greeted him with polite nods and nervous smiles, clearly unsure how to interact with someone who could probably bench press their combined weight. The first event was the deadlift competition. Marcus watched the other men strain to lift 400, 500, even 600 pounds, their faces red with effort and determination. When his turn came, he approached the bar loaded with 800 pounds more weight than anyone else had attempted. The crowd fell silent as Marcus gripped the bar. He could feel every eye upon him, every breath held in anticipation. This was his moment to prove that strength didn't have to mean danger, that being different could be an asset rather than a curse. He lifted the weight smoothly, controlled, making it look effortless. The bar rose steadily until he stood fully upright, 800 pounds of iron held steady in his massive hands. He held the position for a moment, longer than necessary, showing absolute control, then lowered the weight with the same precise movement. The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, and amazed. Whistles filled the air as people realized they'd witnessed something extraordinary. Marcus felt a surge of pride and relief. Sophia had been right. This was working, but the real test came during the truck pull. The borrowed semi-trailer was the heaviest vehicle anyone in Millbrook Falls had ever attempted to move by hand. Previous competitors had managed a few feet at most, straining against the massive weight with everything they had. Marcus took his position, feeling the weight of the harness across his chest and shoulders. Behind him, the truck seemed to stretch forever, a mountain of steel and cargo that would have challenged a professional strongman. The signal came, and Marcus began to pull. The truck moved immediately, wheels turning as Marcus found his rhythm. Step by step, he drew the massive vehicle forward, the crowd running alongside to keep up with his steady progress. 50 feet, 100, 200, he kept going until he'd pulled the truck the entire length of Main Street, setting a record that would probably never be broken. When he finally stopped and turned around, the entire crowd was on their feet, cheering and applauding like he'd just won the Olympics. Children who'd once hidden behind their parents' legs were pointing and smiling. Adults who'd crossed the street to avoid him were shaking their heads. In amazement, Jeremy Walsh himself approached, extending his hand in grudging respect. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I made assumptions about you that weren't fair. That was incredible." But it was Mayor Fitzgerald's reaction that truly signaled the shift in town sentiment. The politician who'd once called Marcus a danger to public safety now stepped forward with a microphone and a politician's practiced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I think we've just witnessed something special here today. Marcus Donovan has shown us that Millbrook Falls is home to one of the strongest men in Pennsylvania, maybe in the entire country. The crowd roared approval, and Marcus felt something he'd never experienced before: complete, unconditional acceptance from his community. People who'd feared him were now claiming him as their own, proud to have him represent their town. Sophia appeared at his side, beaming with pride and vindication. "I told you so," she whispered. But Marcus noticed that her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The celebration continued late into the evening, with people approaching Marcus to congratulate him, ask for autographs, and suggest he enter regional competitions. Local news crews arrived to document the story, and someone mentioned that professional strongman promoters might be interested in meeting him. For the first time in his life, Marcus was famous for something positive. He was no longer the monster of Millbrook Falls. He was their champion, their hometown hero, their claim to fame. But as the crowds finally dispersed and he walked home with Sophia through the quiet streets, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something important had changed between them. The easy intimacy they'd shared seemed strained, replaced by a politeness that felt foreign and uncomfortable. "You were right," he said as they reached her apartment. "The plan worked perfectly. I think I'm finally going to be accepted here." "Yes," Sophia agreed, but her voice was flat. "You're going to be very popular now." Marcus frowned at her tone. "Isn't that what we wanted?" Sophia looked up at him with an expression that broke his heart. It was the same look she'd worn when talking about heroes having to be perfect all the time. "It's what I wanted for you," she said quietly. "I'm just not sure where that leaves U.S." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Sophia had disappeared into her building, leaving him standing alone on the sidewalk, confused and suddenly afraid that his greatest victory might also be his greatest loss. Fame arrived in Millbrook Falls like a tornado, swift and destructive. Within 3 days of the Harvest Festival, the video of Marcus pulling the semi-trailer had gone viral. News crews from Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and New York descended on the small town like vultures, all hunting for the human interest story of the gentle giant who'd overcome adversity. Marcus woke to find satellite trucks lining his street and reporters camped on his front lawn. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from talent agents, strongman promoters, and television producers. The Today Show wanted him for a segment. ESPN was interested in a documentary. A Hollywood agent named Victoria Sterling called 3 times before lunch, promising movie deals and endorsement contracts. "This is insane," Marcus told his father as they watched the media circus from their kitchen window. "Yesterday I was trying to prove I wasn't dangerous. Now they want to turn me into some kind of celebrity freak show." Robert Donovan poured coffee with steady hands, but Marcus could see the worry in his father's eyes. "Fame's a double-edged sword, son. Question is whether you can control it or it controls you." The first interview was with Channel 7 News, conducted in the Donovans' backyard to accommodate Marcus's size. The reporter, Amanda Cross, had done her homework and approached the story with surprising sensitivity. "Marcus, you've dealt with a rare medical condition that caused dramatic physical changes. How did you maintain hope during the darkest periods?" Marcus glanced toward Sophia's apartment, visible through the trees. She hadn't returned his call since the festival, and her absence felt like a physical ache. "I had someone who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. She taught me that being different doesn't mean being dangerous. And that person is your girlfriend, Sophia Chun, the teacher who moved here from San Francisco?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He and Sophia had never officially defined their relationship, but the entire town seemed to assume they were together. "Sophia is... she's the most important person in my life. She saved me in every way that matters." But when the interview aired that evening, Marcus watched alone. Sophia had sent a text saying she was visiting family out of town, though Marcus suspected she was avoiding the media attention. The loneliness hit him harder than any insult he'd endured during his outcast years. The real change began when Victoria Sterling arrived in person. The Hollywood agent stepped out of a black Mercedes like she was walking a red carpet, her designer heels clicking against the Donovan's gravel driveway with predatory precision. "Marcus, darling, you're exactly what America needs right now," she announced, not bothering with introductions. "A real-life superhero story, overcoming adversity through strength and determination. I can make you a millionaire within 6 months." Her vision was intoxicating. Professional strongman competitions with guaranteed prize money, endorsement deals with fitness companies, a reality show following his training routine. She painted a picture of Marcus as the face of overcoming disabilities, inspiring millions while earning enough money to secure his family's future forever. "Think about it," Victoria continued, her manicured fingers dancing over her tablet as she showed him contract projections. "Your parents could retire. You could fund research into growth disorders. You could buy this entire town if you wanted to." The offer was tempting beyond belief. Marcus had spent his entire life feeling like a burden, watching his parents sacrifice for his medical expenses and specialized needs. Now someone was offering to transform his curse into their salvation. But there was a catch, and Victoria delivered it with practiced casualness. "Of course, we'd need to relocate you to Los Angeles for training and filming. Small-town charm only goes so far in the entertainment industry. You need to be where the opportunities are. Leave Millbrook Falls?" Marcus felt his chest tighten. "This is my home." "Sweetheart, home is wherever you make it. And with your earning potential, you could make it anywhere in the world." Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. "Besides, what's really keeping you here? A teaching job at a rural high school? A girl who's been dodging your calls since you became famous?" The words stung because they contained uncomfortable truths. Sophia's absence felt deliberate, and Marcus couldn't understand why his success seemed to be driving her away rather than bringing them closer together. That evening, he finally cornered Sophia at the library where she was working late, grading papers in the empty building. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment her face lit up with genuine pleasure before carefully neutral mask slipped back into place. "How are you handling all the attention?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. "I hate it," Marcus said. "Honestly, the reporters, the phone calls, the people treating me like some kind of circus act. Nothing feels real anymore." Sophia's expression softened slightly. Fame often reveals who people really are underneath. "The question is what it's revealing about you." "What do you mean?" "I mean you've got Hollywood agents promising you millions. And suddenly this small town doesn't seem good enough anymore." There was hurt in her voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Marcus felt like he'd been punched. "That's not fair. I never said anything about leaving. You didn't have to." "I saw the interview, Marcus. The way you talked about me like I was some kind of savior figure, like our friendship was just part of your origin story. Is that all this has been to you? Raw material for your redemption narrative?" The accusation hit him like a physical blow. "You know that's not true. You're the most important person in my life." "Am I? Because it seems like I've been replaced by cameras and contracts and people telling you how special you are." Sophia stood up, gathering her papers with sharp, angry movements. "I spent months convincing this town that you were more than just your size, that you were a complete person with thoughts and feelings and dreams. Now you're letting them reduce you to exactly what I fought against, a spectacle." Marcus felt his carefully controlled emotions beginning to crack. "I thought you'd be happy for me. You're the one who pushed me to enter the competition. You said winning would change everything. I wanted it to change how people saw you, not how you saw yourself." Sophia's voice was rising, months of suppressed frustration finally breaking free. "The Marcus I fell in love with would never consider abandoning his family and community for money and fame." The words hung in the air like a confession neither of them had meant to make. Sophia's eyes widened as she realized what she'd said. while Marcus felt his world shift fundamentally around him. "You fell in love with me?" he whispered, Sophia's composure crumbled. "Of course I did, you impossible, wonderful, infuriating man. How could I not? But I fell in love with someone who thought being accepted by his hometown was worth fighting for. Not someone who'd sell that acceptance to the highest bidder." Marcus reached for her, but she stepped back, tears streaming down her face. "Don't. Just don't. You have a decision to make, Marcus. You can be the hometown hero who uses his gifts to help people, or you can be another celebrity who forgot where he came from. But you can't be both." She left him standing in the empty library, surrounded by books and silence and the wreckage of his certainty. For the first time since his transformation began, Marcus truly felt like a monster, not because of his size or strength, but because he'd hurt the one person who'd seen him as human. The next morning brought a new crisis that put everything else in perspective. Marcus woke to his mother shaking him urgently, her face pale with worry. "There's been an accident at the lumber mill," she said. "A beam collapsed and trapped 3 workers. They need your help." Marcus dressed quickly and raced to the mill where his father worked. The scene was chaos: fire trucks, ambulances, and a crowd of worried families gathered around the industrial building. A massive steel beam had fallen during a shift change, creating a pocket of debris too heavy for conventional equipment to move safely. "Fire Chief." Morrison approached Marcus as he arrived. "Marcus, we've got 3 men trapped under there. The beam is pinning them in place, but we can't use heavy machinery without risking further collapse. We need someone with your strength to lift that beam manually while we extract them." Marcus didn't hesitate. This wasn't about fame or contracts or proving anything to anyone. 3 men's lives were in danger, and he had the power to save them. Beam weighed at least 2 tons, warped and twisted from the impact. Marcus positioned himself carefully, bracing his legs and finding the optimal grip points. The trapped workers were conscious but in obvious pain, their eyes locked on Marcus with desperate hope. "On 3, Chief Morrison called to his crew. "Marcus lifts, we pull them clear. 1.2.3. Marcus lifted with everything he had, his enhanced strength straining against the massive weight. The beam rose slowly, inch by inch, creating just enough space for the rescue workers to drag the injured men to safety. He held it there for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 2 minutes, his muscles screaming in protest until all 3 workers were clear. Only then did he let the beam crash back down, his legs nearly giving out from the effort. The crowd that had gathered cheered, but it was different from the festival celebration. This wasn't entertainment, this was genuine gratitude from people whose neighbors had been saved by Marcus's intervention. Robert Donovan was among the rescued workers, his leg badly bruised but not broken. He gripped his son's massive hand with tears in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, son. Not because you're strong, but because of how you choose to use that strength." The rescue made national news, but the coverage was different this time. Instead of focusing on Marcus as a curiosity or entertainment, the stories emphasized his heroism and community service. Victoria Sterling called within hours, excited about the publicity angle. "This is perfect, darling. Real-life superheroes. Saves lives, the movie writes itself. We could have contracts signed by next week." But Marcus found himself looking at the agent with new eyes, seeing the calculations behind her enthusiasm. To Victoria, the rescue was just another marketing opportunity, no different from pulling a truck at a festival. "I need to think about it," he said, and ended the call. That evening, Marcus walked to Sophia's apartment. He found her sitting on her front steps, as if she'd been waiting for him. Her eyes were red from crying, but she managed a small smile when she saw him. "I heard about what you did today," she said. "That was the Marcus I fell in love with." Marcus sat beside her, the steps creaking ominously under his weight. "I've been thinking about what you said, about who I want to be. And I want to be someone who uses his gifts to help people. But I also want to be someone who can provide for his family, who can fund research to help other people with conditions like mine. Maybe there's a way to do both without losing myself. Sophia leaned against his arm, her small frame fitting perfectly against his side. What are you thinking? What if I stayed here but used the platform strategically? Turned down the reality show and movie deals, but accepted speaking engagements about overcoming disabilities? Used endorsement money to fund medical research and community programs? Became famous for the right reasons instead of just being famous? For the first time in days, Sophia's smile reached her eyes. That sounds like the Marcus I know. The one who thinks about other people before himself. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun set over Millbrook Falls, watching their neighbors return home from work and children play in distant yards. It was a scene Marcus had taken for granted his entire life, but now he understood its value in ways he never had before. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. Earlier you said you fell in love with me. Sophia's cheeks reddened. I did say that, didn't I? Did you mean it? Instead of answering with words, Sophia stood up and faced him. Even with him sitting and her standing, she still had to reach up to cup his face in her hands. Marcus Donovan, she said solemnly, you are the kindest, bravest, most stubborn man I've ever met. You're also about 8 times bigger than me, terrible at understanding your own worth, and completely hopeless at recognizing when people care about you. Yes, I'm in love with you. Hopelessly, completely, probably stupidly in love with you. Marcus felt his heart stop and restart. Even though I'm still technically a giant, especially because you're a giant, do you know how safe I feel when you're around? How proud I am when people see us together and realize that size doesn't determine character. She smiled up at him. Besides, I've always been attracted to men who are larger than life. Marcus kissed her then, carefully and gently, mindful of the size difference but overwhelmed by the rightness of it. When they broke apart, Sophia was grinning. There's one more thing we need to discuss, she said. If you're going to be famous, we need to talk about how to handle the media attention on our relationship. Because Marcus, yes, I'm not going anywhere. Whether you're the town outcast or the hometown hero, you're stuck with me. Marcus felt something settle in his chest that he'd never experienced before: complete, unconditional love and acceptance. Not because of what he could do, or how strong he was, but because of who he chose to be when it mattered most. The future was still uncertain, filled with decisions about fame and career, and how to balance helping others with staying true to himself. But for the first time since his transformation began, Marcus knew he wouldn't face those challenges alone. 6 months after the lumber mill rescue, Marcus Donovan had found his balance between fame and purpose, but that equilibrium was about to face its greatest test. The speaking tour Sophia had helped him develop was gaining national attention, and the Donovan Foundation for Growth Disorder Research had already raised over $2 million. Marcus had become the face of turning adversity into advocacy. But success brought new enemies. Dr. Harrison Webb was everything. Marcus wasn't polished, connected, and absolutely convinced that people like Marcus were medical anomalies to be studied, rather than individuals to be celebrated. As the director of the National Institute for Rare Genetic Conditions, Dr. Webb wielded considerable influence in medical and academic circles. He'd been watching Marcus's rise with growing irritation. This circus needs to end, Dr. Webb announced during a closed-door meeting with his research team, Johns Hopkins. We have a subject with an extremely rare presentation of gigantism being paraded around as some kind of inspirational speaker, instead of submitting to proper scientific study. It's a waste of invaluable research potential. Dr. Webb's opportunity came when Marcus agreed to speak at the National Conference on Rare Disorders in Washington, D.C. The event was supposed to be Marcus's biggest platform, yet a chance to address the medical community directly and advocate for patient-centered research approaches, Sophia accompanied Marcus to Washington, both of them nervous about the high-stakes presentation. This wasn't a small-town festival or even a regional speaking engagement. This was the medical establishment that would determine funding priorities and research directions for years to come. Remember, Sophia coached him in their hotel room the night before, you're not just representing yourself. You're speaking for everyone who's been treated like a specimen instead of a person. Marcus adjusted his specially tailored suit, a gift from a clothing company that had become one of the foundation's sponsors. At 7 feet tall and still growing slightly despite medication, finding formal wear remained a challenge. What if they don't take me seriously? What if they just see a freak show who got lucky with good publicity? Sophia stood on the bed to straighten his tie, bringing them closer to eye level. Then you show them that intelligence and compassion come in all sizes. You've read more about growth disorders in the past 6 months than most of them have in their entire careers. The morning of the conference, Marcus and Sophia arrived early to test the audio equipment and review his presentation slides. The convention center was massive, designed to accommodate thousands of attendees, but Marcus's presence seemed to fill the space entirely. Dr. Webb intercepted them in the speaker's lounge, flanked by 2 colleagues who looked like they'd stepped out of a medical journal advertisement. "Mr. Donovan," Dr. Webb said, with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Dr. Harrison Webb. I've been following your entertainment career with great interest." The dismissive tone was unmistakable, but Marcus extended his hand politely. "Dr. Webb, I've read several of your papers on acromegaly treatment protocols. Your research on surgical interventions has helped a lot of people." Dr. Webb seemed surprised that Marcus knew his work, but recovered quickly. "Yes, well, that's what happens when we approach these conditions scientifically rather than emotionally. Speaking of which, I understand you've declined several research opportunities to continue your publicity tour." "I've been selective about research participation," Marcus replied carefully. "I want to make sure any studies I'm involved in are designed to help patients, not just advance careers." The barb hit its mark. Dr. Webb's smile became predatory. "How noble, though I wonder if your girlfriend has properly explained to you the importance of scientific advancement over personal comfort." Sophia stepped forward, her small frame radiating protective fury. "Dr. Webb, I presume? I've read your work too. Particularly your 2019 paper where you referred to growth disorder patients as subjects 247 times, but used the word people exactly twice." Dr. Webb's face reddened. "Medical terminology requires precision, Ms. Chun. Perhaps if you had actual medical training, you'd understand the difference between sentiment and science. I understand the difference between treating patients as partners versus treating them as problems to be solved," Sophia shot back. "And I understand that Marcus has contributed more to patient advocacy in 6 months than your institute has in 6 years." The confrontation was interrupted by conference organizers calling speakers to their positions, but Marcus could see that Dr. Webb wasn't finished with them. The main auditorium was packed with doctors, researchers, pharmaceutical representatives, and patient advocates from around the world. Marcus had spoken to large crowds before, but never to an audience whose expertise so dramatically exceeded his own formal education. He was introduced by Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, his original endocrinologist, who had become both a medical advisor and personal friend. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce someone who has transformed our understanding of what it means to live successfully with a growth disorder. Marcus Donovan isn't here as a medical curiosity or an inspirational novelty. He's here as a patient who refused to let his condition define his limitations." Marcus took the stage to polite but reserved applause. These weren't people easily impressed by displays of strength or emotional appeals. They wanted data, research, and evidence-based conclusions. 6 months ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system. Dr. Webb published a paper suggesting that patients with gigantism should be encouraged to participate in long-term residential research programs to maximize scientific benefit. With respect, Dr. Webb, I'd like to offer a different perspective. A murmur ran through the audience. It was unusual for patients to directly challenge prominent researchers at professional conferences. Marcus clicked to his first slide, showing brain scans and hormone level charts from his own medical records. These are my test results from the past 18 months. You'll notice that my pituitary adenoma has remained stable since beginning treatment with Dr. Morrison. My growth hormone levels have normalized, and my quality of life indicators have improved dramatically. He clicked to the next slide, showing photographs of his community work, speaking engagements, and foundation activities. But here's what the medical charts don't show. This is what happens when patients are treated as partners in their own care, rather than subjects to be studied. When we're given agency over our treatment decisions. When our expertise about our own bodies is valued alongside clinical expertise. Dr. Webb stood up from his seat in the front row. Mr. Donovan, with all due respect, anecdotal evidence and feel-good photography don't constitute scientific data. Your individual experience, while touching, doesn't invalidate the need for rigorous research protocols. Marcus had prepared for this moment. You're absolutely right, Dr. Webb. Individual experiences aren't sufficient for drawing broad conclusions. That's why I've spent the past 3 months collecting data from 847 patients with various growth disorders across North America. The auditorium fell silent. This wasn't the inspirational speech most people had expected. Marcus clicked to a new set of slides showing comprehensive survey results, statistical analyses, and comparative outcome measures. What we found was that patients who were included as partners in their treatment decisions showed 34% better medication compliance, 28% improved quality of life scores, and 19% better long-term health outcomes compared to patients who were treated using traditional paternalistic medical models. Dr. Webb's expression had shifted from dismissive to concerned. Where did you get funding for this research? What institutional review board approved these survey methods? The Donovan Foundation funded the research, and it was approved by the IRB at Pittsburgh General Hospital. Dr. Morrison served as the principal investigator, and the methodology was reviewed by statisticians at Carnegie Mellon University. Marcus smiled at Dr. Webb's obvious discomfort. I may not have a medical degree, Dr. Webb, but I understand the difference between sentiment and science. The presentation continued for another 20 minutes, with Marcus presenting data on patient advocacy outcomes, research funding allocation, and the economic benefits of patient-centered care models. When he finished, the applause was longer and more enthusiastic than when he'd begun. During the question period, a young resident from Boston Children's Hospital stood up. Mr. Donovan, how do we balance the need for research advancement with patient autonomy? Some studies require participants to accept restrictions that might impact their quality of life. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful question Marcus had hoped for. The key is informed consent that actually informs. Too often, patients are presented with research opportunities as if they're lucky to be included, rather than as partners whose participation makes the research possible. When patients understand how their participation contributes to helping future patients, most are eager to help. But when they feel like lab rats, compliance drops and resentment builds. Another researcher asked about the sustainability of patient-funded research foundations. Marcus explained the foundation's funding model, corporate partnerships, and plans for long-term research support that didn't depend on pharmaceutical company priorities. After the formal presentation, Marcus was surrounded by doctors and researchers who wanted to discuss collaboration opportunities. Several medical schools expressed interest in having him speak to their students about patient perspective. 3 research institutes requested partnerships with the foundation, but the most meaningful Conversation came from Dr. Sarah Kim, a pediatric endocrinologist from Seattle. "Mr. Donovan, I've been treating children with growth disorders for 15 years, and I've never seen advocacy work that was this scientifically rigorous. Would you consider developing a patient education program that we could implement nationally?" Marcus felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with his strength or size. "Dr. Kim, I'd be honored to work with you on that." As the conference wound down, Dr. Webb approached Marcus one final time. His earlier hostility had been replaced by grudging respect. "I owe you an apology," Dr. Webb said stiffly. "I made assumptions about your capabilities based on your background rather than your actual work. Your research methodology was more rigorous than half the papers we publish in our journal." Marcus extended his hand again, and this time Dr. Webb shook it with genuine respect. "Dr. Webb, I'd like to propose something. What if the Foundation partnered with your institute on a longitudinal study of patient outcomes? We provide the patient perspective and community connections. You provide the institutional infrastructure and academic credibility." Dr. Webb considered the offer carefully. "That could be ... mutually beneficial. Though I'd want to review your data collection methods personally. Of course. Peer review makes everything stronger." That evening, Marcus and Sophia celebrated at a small restaurant near their hotel. The day had exceeded every expectation, opening doors to collaborations and opportunities they'd never imagined possible. "I'm so proud of you," Sophia said, raising her wine glass in a toast. "You didn't just speak to that audience, you earned their respect as an equal." Marcus touched his glass to hers, still processing the day's events. "A year ago, I was hiding from people who thought I was dangerous. Today, I was collaborating with some of the smartest medical minds in the country. Sometimes I can't believe. This is my life, believe it. You've earned every bit of this success." Sophia's expression grew more serious. "There's something I want to discuss with you, though. Something important." Marcus felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. "What is it?" "The Foundation is getting too big for us to manage part-time. The research partnerships, speaking engagements, patient advocacy work, it needs full-time leadership. And I've been offered a position as Director of Patient Relations at Pittsburgh General Hospital." Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. "You're leaving?" "Not leaving you, you impossible man. I'm suggesting we both make this official. You as Executive Director of the Foundation, me as your Director of Operations. We could build something incredible together, Marcus. Something that changes how the medical community thinks about patient advocacy." The proposal was everything Marcus had dreamed of, but had been afraid to hope for. "You'd give up teaching to work with me?" "Marcus, I've been working with you since the day we met. This would just make it official." Sophia smiled. "Besides, I can reach more students through the Foundation's education programs than I ever could in a single classroom." Marcus stood up and pulled Sophia into his arms, lifting her off the ground in his enthusiasm. Other diners turned to stare. But for once, Marcus didn't care about the attention. "Is that a yes?" Sophia laughed, her feet dangling several inches off the floor. "That's a yes to everything. The Foundation, the partnerships, the future, all of it." Marcus set her down gently and looked into her eyes. "Sophia Chun, you've made me believe in possibilities I never knew existed. We've made each other believe, Marcus. That's what partnerships are supposed to do." As they walked back to their hotel through the Washington night, Marcus reflected on how drastically his life had changed. 18 months ago, he'd been a monster hiding from his own community. Now he was building a career on helping others like him find their voices and claim their power. The transformation hadn't been magical or sudden. It had been built through medical treatment, personal growth, genuine relationships, and the hard work of proving himself worthy of respect. But most importantly, it had been built on the foundation of someone believing in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to prove that being different could be a strength rather than a weakness. But tonight, walking hand in hand with the woman who'd seen his potential when no one else could, Marcus Donovan knew exactly who he was and who he wanted to become. The Donovan Foundation had been operating for 8 months when the crisis struck. Without warning, Marcus was reviewing grant applications in their new Pittsburgh office when Sophia burst through the door, her face pale and her hands shaking as she clutched her phone. "Marcus, we have a problem, a big one." The news story was already trending on social media when Sophia pulled it up on her laptop. The headline made Marcus's blood run cold. "Foundation fraud, Giants charity under investigation for misuse of medical research funds." The article, published by investigative journalist Rebecca Torres from the Washington Herald, painted a devastating picture of financial irregularities, questionable research practices, and alleged kickbacks to pharmaceutical companies. According to the story, an anonymous whistleblower had provided documents suggesting that the foundation was funneling money to fake research projects while Marcus lived lavishly off donor contributions. "This is insane," Marcus said, reading over Sophia's shoulder. "We've got receipts for every dollar we've spent. Our books are audited quarterly. Where is this coming from?" Sophia scrolled through the article, her expression growing darker with each paragraph. "Look at this source list." Rebecca Torres claims to have interviewed multiple former foundation employees, but we've only had 3 employees total, and none of them were fired or left under bad circumstances. Marcus's phone began ringing immediately. Reporters, donors, and board members all demanding explanations for allegations that seemed to have materialized from thin air. Within hours, their corporate sponsors were issuing statements about reviewing their partnership's pending investigation, and scheduled speaking engagements began canceling across the country. The timing couldn't have been worse. The foundation was days away from announcing their largest research partnership yet, multi-million-dollar collaboration with Johns Hopkins to study quality of life outcomes for pediatric growth disorder patients. Now that partnership hung in limbo while university administrators scrambled to distance themselves from the controversy. "We need to figure out who's behind this," Sophia said, her professional calm beginning to crack. "This isn't random journalism." Someone fed Torres this story, complete with fabricated documents and fake sources. Marcus felt the familiar weight of being judged and found wanting, but this time the stakes were so much higher. It wasn't just his reputation at risk. Hundreds of patients who depended on foundation support could lose access to advocacy services and research funding. What if they're right about one thing? Marcus said quietly, "What if I have been living off donor money? The salary we voted me, the travel expenses, the clothing allowances for speaking engagements. Maybe it does look like I'm profiting from people's sympathy." Sophia turned to face him, her eyes blazing with indignation. "Marcus Donovan, you work 80 hours a week for less money than you could make doing corporate endorsements. You've turned down millions in entertainment deals to focus on advocacy work. Every dollar you've taken from this foundation has been earned 10 times over." But Marcus's confidence was shattered. The same voices that had called him a monster during his outcast years were now calling him a fraud, and the accusation felt almost worse. At least when people feared his size, they were responding to something real. These allegations attacked his character, his integrity, and his motives for helping others. The foundation's emergency board meeting that evening was tense and uncomfortable. The 5 board members, Dr. Morrison, Mrs. Peterson from Millbrook Falls, Dr. Kim from Seattle, a patient advocate from Denver, and a pharmaceutical industry representative, gathered via video conference to address the crisis. "I've reviewed every financial document we have," announced James Mitchell, their pharmaceutical representative who also served as treasurer. "Our books are clean. Every expenditure is documented and appropriate. These allegations appear to be completely fabricated." Dr. Morrison nodded agreement. "The research protocols described in this article don't match any projects we funded. It's like someone took random medical terminology and created fake studies that sound plausible to journalists, but make no sense to actual researchers. But the damage was already spreading. Mrs. Peterson reported that several donors from Millbrook Falls had called to express concerns about their contributions. Dr. Kim had received questions from colleagues about whether the foundation's patient data collection was legitimate. The problem isn't whether the allegations are true, Dr. Kim said bluntly. The problem is that doubt has been planted. In medical research, credibility is everything. Once it's damaged, it takes years to rebuild. Marcus listened to the discussion with growing despair. Everything he and Sophia had built was unraveling because of lies he couldn't prove were lies. Worse, he could see the doubt creeping into even friendly faces. Not doubt about his honesty, but doubt about whether supporting him was worth the professional risk. "I think I should step down," Marcus said suddenly, his voice cutting through the strategic discussion. "Temporarily, at least. Until we can clear this up." The suggestion sent shockwaves through the virtual meeting room. Sophia's expression went from surprise to furious in seconds. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "That would be admitting guilt we don't have for crimes we didn't commit. We fight this with facts and transparency, not by running away." But Marcus felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. Look at what's happening. Our partnerships are falling apart. Our donors are withdrawing support. Our credibility is destroyed. Maybe the foundation would be better off without me as the face of it. Dr. Morrison's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades in medicine. "Marcus, I've seen good doctors destroy their careers by responding to false allegations with panic instead of patience. The truth has a way of emerging, but only if you give it time and fight for it properly." The meeting ended with a plan to hire a crisis management firm and launch their own investigation into the source of the allegations, but Marcus felt hollow and defeated. He'd spent 2 years building credibility only to watch it evaporate overnight. The next morning brought unexpected help from an unlikely source. Victoria Sterling, the Hollywood agent Marcus had rejected months earlier, called with information that changed everything. "Darling, I heard about your little scandal," Victoria said, with characteristic directness. "I might know something useful. Are you familiar with Meridian Strategic Communications?" Marcus had never heard of them, but Sophia recognized the name immediately. They're a crisis management firm that specializes in destroying reputations for corporate clients. Very expensive, very effective, very unethical. "Exactly," Victoria confirmed. "I have it on good authority that someone paid them a substantial sum to manufacture a scandal around your foundation. The timing suggests they wanted to derail your Johns Hopkins partnership specifically. Who would do that?" Marcus asked, though. He was beginning to suspect the answer. "Someone who benefits from keeping patient advocacy weak and dependent on traditional medical institutions," Victoria replied. "Someone who sees your model as a threat to established power structures. I can't prove it yet, but I have a private investigator who owes me favors." Within 48 hours, Victoria's investigator had traced the story back to its source. The anonymous whistleblower was a fake identity created by Meridian Strategic Communications. The fabricated documents had been generated using real foundation letterhead stolen during a break-in at their Pittsburgh office 3 months earlier, a crime they'd reported to police but hadn't connected to the current crisis. Most damning of all, the investigation revealed that Meridian's client was a consortium of pharmaceutical companies who saw the foundation's patient-centered research model as a threat to their control over growth disorder treatment protocols. "They're afraid of you," Victoria explained during a conference call with Marcus, Sophia, and their legal team. "Your foundation is proving that patients can drive research priorities, instead of just accepting whatever pharmaceutical companies want to study. That threatens billions in revenue if other patient groups follow your model." Armed with evidence of the conspiracy, the Foundation's legal team moved quickly. They filed lawsuits against Meridian Strategic Communications and demanded retractions from every outlet that had published the fabricated allegations. More importantly, they released the evidence publicly, turning the story from Foundation under investigation to patient advocacy group targeted by corporate sabotage. The reversal was swift and dramatic. Rebecca Torres, the journalist who'd published the original story, wrote a follow-up piece exposing how she'd been manipulated by Meridian's fabricated evidence. Other news outlets picked up the corporate conspiracy angle, generating more positive coverage than the Foundation had ever received. But the real vindication came from the medical community itself. Dr. Webb, who had become an unlikely ally since their Washington conference encounter, published an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine, defending the Foundation's research integrity and condemning corporate efforts to silence patient voices. The attack on the Donovan Foundation represents everything wrong with our current medical research system, Dr. Webb wrote. When pharmaceutical companies can deploy professional character assassins against patient advocates, we have abandoned our oath to first do no harm. The Johns Hopkins partnership not only survived but expanded, with university administrators publicly apologizing for their initial hesitation and committing additional resources to patient-centered research. Other medical institutions reached out to express solidarity and explore collaboration opportunities. Most gratifying of all, the crisis had revealed the depth of support the Foundation had built. Donors increased their contributions in a show of solidarity. Patient advocacy groups across multiple disease categories reached out to share their own experiences with corporate retaliation. The Foundation's model was being adopted by rare disease communities nationwide. "I can't believe we survived that," Marcus said one evening as he and Sophia reviewed the aftermath in their home office. The Foundation had relocated to a larger space in Pittsburgh, but they still did much of their strategic planning from the converted barn behind Marcus's parents' house in Millbrook Falls. "We didn't just survive," Sophia corrected, pulling up their latest impact report on her laptop. "We thrived. Foundation funding is up 300% from before the crisis. We've got partnership requests from 12 major medical centers. Congress is considering legislation to protect patient advocacy groups from corporate retaliation." Marcus shook his head in amazement. "How did an attempt to destroy us end up making us stronger?" "Because people hate being manipulated, and they especially hate seeing the little guy get bullied by powerful interests. Plus, the truth really does have power when you fight for it properly." Sophia stood up and moved to the window overlooking the woods where Marcus had once hidden from the world. "You know what the most important part is, though? You didn't run. When everything looked hopeless, when it seemed like stepping down was the smart move, you stayed and fought for what we'd built together." Marcus joined her at the window, his arms settling around her shoulders as they looked out at the peaceful forest. "I almost did run. If you hadn't stopped me, if Dr. Morrison hadn't reminded me that truth takes time to emerge, I would have walked away from everything. But you didn't. And that's why this foundation works, why patients trust us, why the medical community respects us. Because when we say we're partners, we mean it. Partners don't abandon each other when things get difficult." The crisis had changed Marcus in ways he was still discovering. The experience of being falsely accused had been devastating, but surviving it with his integrity intact had given him a confidence that wasn't dependent on external validation. He'd learned the difference between being liked and being respected, between popularity and credibility. More importantly, he'd learned that the work itself was more important than his role in it. When he'd offered to step down to protect the Foundation, he'd been thinking like someone whose identity was tied to being the center of attention. Now he understood that true leadership sometimes meant risking personal comfort for larger principles. "There's something I want to discuss with you," Sophia said, her tone shifting to something more serious. The foundation board has been talking about expansion opportunities. There's interest in creating regional chapters, developing international partnerships, maybe even launching a political advocacy arm. Marcus turned to look at her more fully. That sounds incredible, also incredibly overwhelming. It would mean traveling more, managing a much larger organization, probably relocating to a bigger city where we could access more resources and partners. Sophia paused, studying his expression. It would mean leaving Millbrook Falls permanently. The suggestion hit Marcus with unexpected force. Millbrook Falls had been his prison for so many years, the place where he'd been seen as a monster and an outcast. But it had also been where Sophia had found him, where his transformation had begun, where he'd learned to use his strength for good instead of hiding from it. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," he said honestly. "This place is part of who I am now, the good parts and the difficult parts." Sophia smiled and leaned against his chest. "I was hoping you'd say that. Because I think the Foundation's greatest strength is that it's rooted in real community, not just abstract ideals. If we move to Washington or New York, we risk becoming just another professional advocacy organization. Here, we stay connected to the people we're trying to help." Marcus felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "So we stay? We stay. We grow the Foundation from here. We maintain our partnerships with major medical centers, but we keep our headquarters in the place that taught us both what it means to turn outsiders into insiders." Looking out at the familiar landscape of his childhood, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 2 years ago, he'd been hiding in these same woods, convinced that his size made him too dangerous to be around other people. Now he was running a national patient advocacy organization from his hometown, working with some of the most respected medical institutions in the country, and planning a future with the woman who'd seen his potential when no one else could. Transformation had been painful, complicated, and far from magical. But it had been real, built on medical treatment, genuine relationships, hard work, and the gradual accumulation of trust and respect. Most importantly, it had been built on the understanding that being different wasn't a flaw to be hidden, but a strength to be channeled toward helping others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients who needed advocacy, new research, partnerships to develop, and new opportunities to prove that monsters could become heroes simply by choosing to serve something larger than themselves. But tonight, looking out at the place where his story had begun, Marcus Donovan knew exactly who he was and what he was meant to do with the gifts he'd been given. 2 years after the corporate conspiracy had tried to destroy them, the Donovan Foundation stood at a crossroads that would define its future. Marcus stood before the bathroom mirror in their Pittsburgh hotel suite, adjusting his tie for what would be the most important presentation of his life. Today, he would address the United Nations Global Health Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland. Representing not just growth, disorder patients, but all rare disease communities worldwide. The invitation had come after months of diplomatic negotiations. The Foundation's model of patient-driven research had gained international attention, particularly after their breakthrough study proving that patient-centered care reduced treatment costs by 40%. While improving outcomes across all measurable categories. Now the UN wanted Marcus to present their findings as a potential framework for global healthcare reform. "You look nervous," Sophia observed, emerging from the bedroom in a navy dress that complemented Marcus's formal suit. Even after 3 years together, she still took his breath away, not just because of her beauty, but because of the fierce intelligence and unwavering loyalty that had carried them through every crisis. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "Speaking to medical conferences is one thing. This is world leaders, health ministers, people who make decisions affecting millions of lives. What if I mess this up?" Sophia moved to stand behind him, her hand smoothing the fabric across his broad shoulders. In the mirror, they looked like an impossible couple, beauty and the beast made real. But Marcus had long stopped seeing the size difference. Now he Saw partners equals two people who had built something meaningful together. Remember what you told that little girl in Detroit last month? Sophia asked. The one with Russell Silver syndrome who was afraid to start school because she looked different? Marcus smiled, recalling the encounter during their Midwest advocacy tour. I told her that being different wasn't a mistake to be hidden, it was a gift to be shared with people who needed to see that different could be beautiful. Exactly, and today you're sharing that gift with the world. The walk to the UN building was surreal. Marcus had grown accustomed to stares, but Geneva's international crowd reacted differently than American audiences. Here, his size seemed less shocking and more diplomatic. Several delegates approached to introduce themselves, speaking in accented English about patients in their own countries who could benefit from the Foundation's advocacy. Model Dr. Amara Okafor, Nigeria's Minister of Health, was particularly interested in adapting their patient education programs for communities with limited literacy. In my country, we have many people with conditions like yours, she explained. But they hide in villages, afraid to seek treatment because doctors treat them like spirits instead of patients. Marcus felt the familiar fire of purpose igniting in his chest. This was why they'd worked so hard to prove their model's effectiveness, not just to help patients in wealthy countries, but to create frameworks that could be adapted globally. The main assembly hall was overwhelming in its grandeur. Representatives from 194 countries filled the tiered seating, their nameplates creating a map of the world's diplomatic landscape. Marcus had spoken to large audiences before, but never one with this level of collective power to change lives. Secretary General Maria Santos introduced him with words that still seemed impossible to believe. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present Mr. Marcus Donovan, whose foundation has revolutionized patient advocacy and demonstrated that healthcare reform can be driven by those it serves rather than those who profit from it. Marcus approached the podium, his enhanced hearing picking up whispered translations in dozens of languages. For a moment, he was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment, a kid from small-town Pennsylvania, addressing the world's most powerful health leaders about transforming global medicine. 3 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall. I was hiding in the woods behind my house because I believed I was too different, too dangerous, too monstrous to be around other people. Today, I stand before you representing 300 million people worldwide who live with rare diseases, and I want to share what we've learned about turning difference into strength. He clicked to his first slide, showing a photograph of himself at his lowest point, 7 feet tall, facial features distorted by his condition, eyes filled with despair and isolation. This is what medical textbooks call gigantism. This is what my community called a monster. This is what I called hopeless. Marcus paused, letting the image sink in. But this is also what happens when patients are treated as problems to be solved rather than partners in their own care. The next slide showed his transformation, not just physical, thanks to Dr. Morrison's treatment, but emotional and social. Marcus surrounded by patients, working with researchers, testifying before legislative committees. This is what happens when we flip the script. When patients become advocates instead of victims. When medical institutions listen to our expertise about our own bodies. When communities embrace difference instead of fearing it. Marcus presented their data methodically, building the case for patient-centered care with the same rigor that had earned Dr. Webb's respect years earlier. Quality of life improvements, cost reductions, better treatment compliance, faster research breakthroughs, every metric supported the same conclusion. But the most important finding isn't in our statistics, Marcus continued. It's in the stories of individual patients who went from hiding to leading, from shame to pride, from isolation to community. Healthcare isn't just about treating disease. It's about helping people live fully human lives. He clicked to a video montage featuring patients from around the world who had been trained in the Foundation's advocacy methods. A teenager with dwarfism in India who had started her country's first support group. A man with Marfan syndrome in Brazil who had convinced his government to fund research into connective tissue disorders. A woman with acromegaly in South Africa who had created educational programs for rural communities. These patients didn't need us to save them, Marcus explained. They needed us to show them that their voices mattered, that their experiences had value, that their differences could be sources of strength rather than shame. During the question period, the French delegate asked about scalability. Your model works in wealthy countries with established healthcare systems. How do we adapt this for regions with limited resources? Marcus had anticipated this question, and his answer drew on months of consultation with international partners. The beauty of patient-driven advocacy is that it doesn't require expensive infrastructure. It requires training, communication tools, and institutional willingness to listen. We've developed pilot programs in Kenya, Guatemala, and Bangladesh that are showing promising results with minimal financial investment. The German health minister pressed further. What about quality control? How do we ensure that patient advocates have accurate medical knowledge? The same way we ensure that doctors have accurate knowledge about patient experiences, Marcus replied. Through education, collaboration, and mutual respect. Our certification programs require 200 hours of medical education, but they also require healthcare providers to complete training in patient perspective and cultural competency. But it was the question from Dr. Chen Wei, representing China's massive healthcare system, that cut to the heart of the matter. Mr. Donovan, your personal story is inspiring, but how do we convince established medical institutions to share power with patients? Change is difficult when existing systems benefit those in control. Marcus felt the weight of every conversation he'd had with skeptical doctors, resistant administrators, and fearful colleagues. Dr. Chun, I learned something important during my own transformation. People don't change because they're forced. Do they change when they see that change serves their own interests? Patient-centered care doesn't just help patients. It makes doctors more effective, reduces healthcare costs, improves treatment outcomes, and increases job satisfaction among providers. He clicked to his final slide, showing outcome data from hospitals that had implemented their model. When Shanghai Children's Hospital adopted our patient advocacy protocols, their patient satisfaction scores increased by 60%, their readmission rates dropped by 35%, and their staff retention improved dramatically. Change isn't just morally right, it's practically beneficial. The presentation concluded to sustained applause, but Marcus knew the real work would happen in the smaller meetings scheduled throughout the week. Individual countries wanted to discuss specific implementation strategies. Medical organizations sought guidance on training programs. Patient advocacy groups requested partnership agreements. But the most meaningful conversation came that evening during the reception at the Swiss Ministry of Health. Marcus was speaking with a group of African health ministers when a small voice interrupted their discussion. Excuse me, Mr. Marcus. Marcus looked down to see a girl of perhaps 12, accompanied by what appeared to be her grandmother. The child was tiny even by typical standards, with the distinctive features of Turner syndrome. This is my granddaughter, Anya explained. The older woman in accented English. She watched your speech on television today. She wanted to meet you. Marcus knelt down to bring himself closer to the girl's eye level, though he still towered over her. Hello, Anya. It's very nice to meet you. Are you really the monster who became beautiful? The girl asked with startling directness. The question caught Marcus completely off guard. He glanced at Sophia, who had joined their conversation, before answering honestly. I was never really a monster, Anya. I just believed I was because that's what other people told me. The beautiful part came when I learned to see myself the way good people saw me. Anya considered this seriously. My grandmother says I'm beautiful, but the other children at school say I'm too small and weird-looking. Marcus felt his heart break for this brave little girl. Can I tell you a secret? The most beautiful people I know are the ones who are different in interesting ways. Being small and unique makes you special, not weird. But how do I make them understand that? Marcus looked at this determined child and saw himself at his lowest point, isolated, misunderstood, convinced that being different meant being wrong. But he also saw something he'd never had at that age, someone showing her that difference could be strength. You keep being yourself, Anya. You learn everything you can about your condition so you can teach others. You find friends who see your specialness instead of your difference. And someday, you help other kids who feel the way you feel right now. Anya's face lit up with understanding. Like you do. Exactly like I do. The girl's grandmother had tears in her eyes. Anya wants to be a doctor when she grows up, but she worries she's too different. The world needs doctors who understand what it's like to be different, Sophia interjected gently. Some of the best doctors I know are people who faced their own medical challenges. As Anya and her grandmother moved on to meet other delegates, Marcus felt the full weight of what they'd accomplished settling over him. 3 years ago, he'd been a frightened young man convinced he was too monstrous to be around other people. Now he was inspiring children across the world to see their differences as gifts rather than curses. She called you beautiful, Sophia observed quietly. She called me a monster who became beautiful, Marcus corrected. Maybe that's the most accurate description anyone's ever given me. Sophia took his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his massive ones. You know what I think? I think you were always beautiful. You just needed someone to help you see it. The week in Geneva concluded with the passage of Resolution 74.32, Framework for Patient-Centered Global Health Advocacy. It wasn't binding law, but it established international standards for including patient voices in healthcare policy and research funding decisions. More importantly, it committed UN member states to supporting patient advocacy training programs. Based on the Foundation's model, on their last evening in Switzerland, Marcus and Sophia walked along Lake Geneva as the sun set behind the Alps. The water reflected the mountains and sky, creating a mirror image that seemed to double the beauty of the landscape. I keep thinking about something, Sophia said as they found a bench overlooking the lake. That first day I met you, when you said you were dangerous, do you remember what I told you? Marcus smiled at the memory. You said I had a theory about monsters and beauty that you wanted to test. And what do you think? Did the theory work? Marcus considered the question seriously. They'd spent 3 years proving that someone society labeled as monstrous could become a force for good in the world. But more than that, they'd proven that the labels themselves were meaningless, that beauty and monstrosity were choices rather than conditions. I think, Marcus said slowly, that monsters and beauty were never opposites. I think they're just different ways of being powerful. The choice is whether you use that power to hurt or to heal. Sophia leaned against his shoulder, her head fitting perfectly in the space below his heart. And which did you choose? I chose to heal. We chose to heal. And I think that choice made all the difference. As they sat together watching the sun set over Lake Geneva, Marcus reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. A frightened giant and a fearless teacher had somehow built a movement that was changing healthcare around the world. They'd proven that love could overcome fear, that partnerships could triumph over prejudice, and that sometimes the people society calls monsters are actually the ones with the most beauty to offer. Tomorrow they would fly home to Millbrook Falls, where the Foundation's work would continue from the small town that had taught them both what it meant to turn outsiders into insiders. There would be new patients to advocate for, new research partnerships to develop, and new opportunities to prove that being different was a strength rather than a weakness. But tonight, looking out at the peaceful lake with the woman who had seen his potential when no one else could, Marcus Donovan knew that the most important transformation had already taken place. He'd learned to see himself through the eyes of love rather than fear, and that had made all the difference in the world. The monster had become beautiful not through magic or transformation, but through the simple recognition that he had always been both, and that beauty, in the end, was simply the choice to use whatever power you possessed in service of something larger than yourself. 2 years after the corporate conspiracy had tried to destroy them, the Donovan Foundation stood at a crossroads that would define its future. Marcus stood before the bathroom mirror in their Pittsburgh hotel suite, adjusting his tie for what would be the most important presentation of his life. Today, he would address the United Nations Global Health Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland, representing not just growth disorder patients, but all rare disease communities worldwide. The invitation had come after months of diplomatic negotiations. The Foundation's model of patient-driven research had gained international attention, particularly after their breakthrough study proving that patient-centered care reduced treatment costs by 40%, while improving outcomes across all measurable categories. Now the UN wanted Marcus to present their findings as a potential framework for global healthcare reform. "You look nervous," Sophia observed, emerging from the bedroom in a navy dress that complemented Marcus's formal suit. Even after 3 years together, she still took his breath away, not just because of her beauty, but because of the fierce intelligence and unwavering loyalty that had carried them through every crisis. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "Speaking to medical conferences is one thing. This is world leaders, health ministers, people who make decisions affecting millions of lives. What if I mess this up?" Sophia moved to stand behind him, her hands smoothing the fabric across his broad shoulders. In the mirror, they looked like an impossible couple, beauty and the beast made real, but Marcus had long stopped seeing the size difference. Now he saw partners, equals, two people who had built something meaningful together. "Remember what you told that little girl in Detroit last month?" Sophia asked. "The one with Russell Silver syndrome who was afraid to start school because she looked different." Marcus smiled, recalling the encounter during their Midwest advocacy tour. "I told her that being different wasn't a mistake to be hidden, it was a gift to be shared with people who needed to see that different could be beautiful." "Exactly, and today you're sharing that gift with the world." The walk to the UN building was surreal. Marcus had grown accustomed to stares, but Geneva's international crowd reacted differently than American audiences. Here, his size seemed less shocking and more diplomatic. Several delegates approached to introduce themselves, speaking in accented English about patients in their own countries who could benefit from the Foundation's advocacy. Model. Dr. Amara Okafor, Nigeria's Minister of Health, was particularly interested in adapting their patient education programs for communities with limited literacy. "In my country, we have many people with conditions like yours," she explained. "But they hide in villages, afraid to seek treatment because doctors treat them like spirits instead of patients." Marcus felt the familiar fire of purpose igniting in his chest. This was why they'd worked so hard to prove their model's effectiveness, not just to help patients in wealthy countries, but to create frameworks that could be adapted globally. The main assembly hall was overwhelming in its grandeur. Representatives from 194 countries filled the tiered seating, their nameplates creating a map of the world's diplomatic landscape. Marcus had spoken to large audiences before, but never one with this level of collective power to change lives. Secretary General Maria Santos introduced him with words that still seemed impossible to believe. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present Mr. Marcus Donovan, whose foundation has revolutionized patient advocacy and demonstrated that healthcare reform can be driven by those it serves rather than those who profit from it." Marcus approached the podium, his enhanced hearing picking up whispered translations in dozens of languages. For a moment, he was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. A kid from small-town Pennsylvania, addressing the world's most powerful health leaders, about transforming global medicine. 3 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall. I was hiding in the woods behind my house because I believed I was too different, too dangerous, too monstrous to be around other people. Today, I stand before you, representing 300 million people worldwide who live with rare diseases, and I want to share what we've learned about turning difference into strength. He clicked to his first slide, showing a photograph of himself at his lowest, 0.7 feet tall, facial features distorted by his condition, eyes filled with despair and isolation. This is what medical textbooks call gigantism. This is what my community called a monster. This is what I called hopelessness. Marcus paused, letting the image sink in. But this is also what happens when patients are treated as problems to be solved, rather than partners in their own care. The next slide showed his transformation, not just physical, thanks to Dr. Morrison's treatment, but emotional and social. Marcus surrounded by patients, working with researchers, testifying before legislative committees. This is what happens when we flip the script. When patients become advocates instead of victims. When medical institutions listen to our expertise about our own bodies. When communities embrace difference instead of fearing it. Marcus presented their data methodically, building the case for patient-centered care with the same rigor that had earned Dr. Webb's respect years earlier. Quality of life improvements, cost reductions, better treatment compliance, faster research breakthroughs, every metric supported the same conclusion. But the most important finding isn't in our statistics, Marcus continued. It's in the stories of individual patients who went from hiding to leading, from shame to pride, from isolation to community. Healthcare isn't just about treating disease, it's about helping people live fully human lives. He clicked to a video montage featuring patients from around the world who had been trained in the Foundation's advocacy methods. A teenager with dwarfism in India who had started her country's first support group. A man with Marfan syndrome in Brazil who had convinced his government to fund research into connective tissue disorders. A woman with acromegaly in South Africa who had created educational programs for rural communities. These patients didn't need us to save them, Marcus explained. They needed us to show them that their voices mattered, that their experiences had value, that their differences could be sources of strength rather than shame. During the question period, the French delegate asked about scalability. Your model works in wealthy countries with established healthcare systems. How do we adapt this for regions with limited resources? Marcus had anticipated this question, and his answer drew on months of consultation with international partners. The beauty of patient-driven advocacy is that it doesn't require expensive infrastructure. It requires training, communication tools, and institutional willingness to listen. We've developed pilot programs in Kenya, Guatemala, and Bangladesh that are showing promising results with minimal financial investment. The German health minister pressed further. What about quality control? How do we ensure that patient advocates have accurate medical knowledge? The same way we ensure that doctors have accurate knowledge about patient experiences, Marcus replied. Through education, collaboration, and mutual respect. Our certification programs require 200 hours of medical education, but they also require healthcare providers to complete training in patient perspective and cultural competency. But it was the question from Dr. Chen Wei, representing China's massive healthcare system, that cut to the heart of the matter. Mr. Donovan, your personal story is inspiring, but how do we convince established medical institutions to share power with patients? Change is difficult when existing systems benefit those in control. Marcus felt the weight of every conversation he'd had with skeptical doctors, resistant administrators, and fearful colleagues. Dr. Chun, I learned something important during my own transformation. People don't change because they're forced. Do they change when they see that change serves their own interests? Patient-centered care doesn't just help patients. It makes doctors more effective, reduces healthcare costs, improves treatment outcomes, and increases job satisfaction among providers. He clicked to his final slide, showing outcome data from hospitals that had implemented their model. When Shanghai Children's Hospital adopted our patient advocacy protocols, their patient satisfaction scores increased by 60%, their readmission rates dropped by 35%, and their staff retention improved dramatically. Change isn't just morally right, it's practically beneficial. The presentation concluded to sustained applause, but Marcus knew the real work would happen in the smaller meetings scheduled throughout the week. Individual countries wanted to discuss specific implementation strategies. Medical organizations sought guidance on training programs. Patient advocacy groups requested partnership agreements. But the most meaningful conversation came that evening during the reception at the Swiss Ministry of Health. Marcus was speaking with a group of African health ministers when a small voice interrupted their discussion. "Excuse me, Mr. Marcus." Marcus looked down to see a girl of perhaps 12, accompanied by what appeared to be her grandmother. The child was tiny even by typical standards, with the distinctive features of Turner syndrome. "This is my granddaughter Anya," explained the older woman in accented English. "She watched your speech on television today. She wanted to meet you." Marcus knelt down to bring himself closer to the girl's eye level, though he still towered over her. "Hello, Anya. It's very nice to meet you." "Are you really the monster who became beautiful?" the girl asked with startling directness. The question caught Marcus completely off guard. He glanced at Sophia, who had joined their conversation, before answering honestly. "I was never really a monster, Anya. I just believed I was because that's what other people told me. The beautiful part came when I learned to see myself the way good people saw me." Anya considered this seriously. "My grandmother says I'm beautiful, but the other children at school say I'm too small and weird-looking." Marcus felt his heart break. For this brave little girl, "Can I tell you a secret? The most beautiful people I know are the ones who are different in interesting ways. Being small and unique makes you special, not weird. But how do I make them understand that?" Marcus looked at this determined child and saw himself at his lowest point, isolated, misunderstood, convinced that being different meant being wrong. But he also saw something he'd never had at that age, someone showing her that difference could be strength. "You keep being yourself, Anya. You learn everything you can about your condition so you can teach others. You find friends who see your specialness instead of your difference. And someday you help other kids who feel the way you feel right now." Anya's face lit up with understanding. "Like you do?" "Exactly like I do." The girl's grandmother had tears in her eyes. "Anya wants to be a doctor when she grows up, but she worries she's too different." "The world needs doctors who understand what it's like to be different," Sophia interjected gently. "Some of the best doctors I know are people who face their own medical challenges." As Anya and her grandmother moved on to meet other delegates, Marcus felt the full weight of what they'd accomplished settling over him. 3 years ago, he'd been a frightened young man convinced he was too monstrous to be around other people. Now he was inspiring children across the world to see their differences as gifts rather than curses. "She called you beautiful," Sophia observed quietly. "She called me a monster who became beautiful," Marcus corrected. "Maybe that's the most accurate description anyone's ever given me." Sophia took his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his massive ones. "You know what I think? I think you were always beautiful. You just needed someone to help you see it." The week in Geneva concluded with the passage of Resolution 74.32, Framework for Patient-Centered Global Health Advocacy. It wasn't binding law, but it established international standards for including patient voices in healthcare policy and research funding decisions. More importantly, it committed UN member states to supporting patient advocacy training programs. Based on the Foundation's model, on their last evening in Switzerland, Marcus and Sophia walked along Lake Geneva as the sun set behind the Alps. The water reflected the mountains and sky, creating a mirror image that seemed to double the beauty of the landscape. "I keep thinking about something," Sophia said as they found a bench overlooking the lake. "That first day I met you, when you said you were dangerous. Do you remember what I told you?" Marcus smiled at the memory. "You said I had a theory about monsters and beauty that you wanted to test. And what do you think? Did the theory work?" Marcus considered the question seriously. They'd spent 3 years proving that someone society labeled as monstrous could become a force for good in the world. But more than that, they'd proven that the labels themselves were meaningless, that beauty and monstrosity were choices rather than conditions. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that monsters and beauty were never opposites. I think they're just different ways of being powerful. The choice is whether you use that power to hurt or to heal." Sophia leaned against his shoulder, her head fitting perfectly in the space below his heart. "And which did you choose?" "I chose to heal. We chose to heal. And I think that choice made all the difference." As they sat together watching the sun set over Lake Geneva, Marcus reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. A frightened giant and a fearless teacher had somehow built a movement that was changing healthcare around the world. They'd proven that love could overcome fear, that partnerships could triumph over prejudice, and that sometimes the people society calls monsters are actually the ones with the most beauty to offer. Tomorrow they would fly home to Millbrook Falls, where the Foundation's work would continue from the small town that had taught them both what it meant to turn outsiders into insiders. There would be new patients to advocate for, new research partnerships to develop, and new opportunities to prove that being different was a strength rather than a weakness. But tonight, looking out at the peaceful lake with the woman who had seen his potential when no one else could, Marcus Donovan knew that the most important transformation had already taken place. He'd learned to see himself through the eyes of love rather than fear, and that had made all the difference in the world. The monster had become beautiful not through magic or transformation, but through the simple recognition that he had always been both, and that beauty, in the end, was simply the choice to use whatever power you possessed in service of something larger than yourself. 5 years had passed since Geneva, and Marcus Donovan stood in a place he'd never imagined returning, to the cramped backstage area of the Millbrook Falls Community Theater. Tonight was the premiere of The Giant's Heart, a musical written by the local high school drama teacher about his transformation from outcast to advocate. The irony wasn't lost on him that his story was being performed in the same building where he'd once hidden during school assemblies. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia asked, adjusting the boutonniere on his lapel. She was 8 months pregnant with their first child, and her growing belly pressed against his leg as she fussed with his formal wear. "You could still change your mind about the speech." Marcus smiled down at his wife of 2 years, still amazed that she'd chosen to build a life with him. "The kids have been working on this for months. Besides, it's fitting that the story comes full circle here." The theater was packed with an unusual mix of audiences. Local families sat beside international delegates who'd traveled to Millbrook Falls for the Foundation's annual conference. Dr. Morrison chatted with Mrs. Peterson, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever. Mayor Fitzgerald Grayer, but still politically minded, worked. The crowd like it was election season, but the most important guest was 13-year-old Anya Petrov, the girl they'd met in Geneva 5 years earlier. Her grandmother had passed away the previous year, but Anya had continued their correspondence with Marcus and Sophia. Now 16 and taller than expected despite her Turner syndrome, she was spending the summer as an intern with the foundation, learning advocacy skills she planned to take back to Eastern Europe. "Mr. Marcus," Anya called out, approaching with the confidence that came from years of advocacy training. "The reporters from the BBC want to interview you after the show. And there's a producer from Netflix who's interested in the film rights." "Marcus," shook his head with amusement. Even after all these years, people wanted to turn his life into entertainment rather than education. Tell them what we always tell Hollywood: our story isn't for sale, but our mission is worth supporting. The lights dimmed, and Marcus took his seat in the front row beside Sophia. Watching local teenagers portray the darkest and brightest moments of his life was surreal. The young man playing Marcus had been chosen more for his acting ability than his size, wearing stilts and prosthetics to approximate the height difference. But somehow, the actor captured something essential about Marcus's journey: the loneliness, the fear, the gradual emergence of hope. When the actress playing Sophia first appeared on stage, Marcus felt his wife squeeze his hand. The girl had studied Sophia's mannerisms and speech patterns, delivering the line that had changed everything. What you're experiencing, the continued growth, the enhanced senses, the physical changes, it's a medical condition, not a curse. The most powerful moment came during the festival scene, when the actor portraying Marcus broke down sobbing after the crowd's initial rejection, crying out, "They call me a monster." The actress playing Sophia stepped forward without hesitation, delivering the line that had inspired the musical's title, "Then I must be beauty." Marcus glanced at Sophia during that scene and saw tears streaming down her face. "I'd forgotten how young we were," she whispered. "How scared we both were." "We were brave," Marcus corrected gently. "We just didn't know it yet." The musical compressed their 5-year journey into 2 acts, necessarily simplifying the complex work of building an advocacy organization and changing medical culture. But it captured something true about the transformation that occurred when communities chose inclusion over fear, when institutions prioritized patients over profits. During intermission, Marcus was approached by Dr. James Sullivan, a pediatric endocrinologist from Boston Children's Hospital, who'd become one of the Foundation's strongest medical partners. "Marcus, I wanted you to know we just received approval for the longitudinal study you proposed 3 years ago. 27 medical centers across North America, 5-year patient outcome tracking, everything you advocated for." The study represented a breakthrough Marcus had been fighting for since the Foundation's early days. Research designed by patients and medical professionals working as equal partners, focused on quality of life rather than just clinical measurements. "Who's the principal investigator?" Marcus asked. Dr. Sullivan smiled. "Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, with patient advocate oversight provided by the Donovan Foundation. It's exactly the collaborative model you've been promoting." As the second act began, Marcus watched the condensed version of their corporate conspiracy crisis, their UN presentation, and their decision to remain rooted in Millbrook Falls, despite opportunities for expansion. The musical's ending was more optimistic than reality stage productions, required clear resolutions that real life rarely provided. But when the final song concluded with the entire cast singing about finding beauty in difference, the standing ovation was genuine and sustained. Marcus found himself on his feet along with everyone else, applauding not just the performers, but the community that had grown enough to celebrate a story they'd once been part of creating. After the show, Marcus was invited on stage for a brief speech. Looking out at the packed theater, he saw faces that represented his entire journey: Dr. Morrison, who'd provided his medical foundation; Mrs. Peterson, who'd offered his first public support; Jeremy Walsh, who'd become an unlikely friend after their early conflicts; Officer Parker, whose investigation had once felt like persecution, but was simply a man doing his job. 5 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the theater's sound system, "I thought my story was about becoming normal. Tonight, I realize it was about learning to be extraordinary, not because of my size or strength, but because of the choice to use whatever gifts you have in service of others." He paused, looking at Sophia in the front row, her hand resting on their unborn child. "This musical tells the story of one giant and one teacher, but the real story belongs to all of you. Every person who chose understanding over fear, inclusion over exclusion, partnership over prejudice. You didn't just change my life, you changed what's possible for everyone who's ever felt too different to belong. The applause was warm and genuine, but Marcus raised his hand for quiet. There's one more thing. Tonight, we're announcing the establishment of the Millbrook Falls Institute for Patient Advocacy. This theater, this building where I once hid, from assemblies, will be renovated into a training center for patient advocates from around the world. The announcement sent a buzz through the audience. The Institute represented a massive expansion of their work, a permanent facility where patients, families, and medical professionals could learn collaborative advocacy skills before returning to their home communities. We're staying here, Marcus continued, because this is where we learned that transformation happens in community, not in isolation. Every patient advocate who trains here will carry Millbrook Falls' story back to their own communities, proving that change begins with believing that everyone deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to define their own worth. After the formal reception, Marcus and Sophia walked slowly through downtown Millbrook Falls, past the shops and restaurants that had become part of their extended family. The autumn air carried hints of the approaching winter, and Sophia pulled her coat tighter around her expanding figure. "Are you ready to be a father?" she asked as they paused outside the diner where they'd had their first real conversation about his future. Marcus considered the question seriously. Their child would grow up in a world where his father was internationally known, where difference was celebrated rather than hidden, where the word monster had been reclaimed as a term of strength rather than shame. "I'm ready to teach our child what you taught me," he said finally. "That being different isn't a mistake to be fixed, it's a gift to be shared. That real beauty comes from choosing kindness over cruelty, inclusion over isolation, love over fear." Sophia stopped walking and turned to face him, her hands reaching up to cup his face. Even after all these years, she still had to look up to meet his eyes, but the gesture no longer emphasized their size difference. It emphasized their connection. "Do you know what I love most about our story?" she asked. "What's that?" "It's not a fairy tale. We didn't wave a magic wand and fix everything. We did the work: medical treatment, relationship building, community engagement, institutional change. Real transformation, not fantasy transformation." Marcus nodded, understanding what she meant. Their story would be retold in various forms: musicals, articles, academic papers, advocacy training materials, but the real power lay in its replicability. Other communities could create their own versions of inclusion and acceptance through similar choices and efforts. "Plus," Sophia added with a grin, "in our version, beauty doesn't have to give up her independence to live in the beast's castle. We built our castle together." As they reached their home, the expanded farmhouse where Marcus's parents still lived, but which now included a separate wing for Marcus, Sophia, and their growing family, Marcus reflected on the unexpected life they'd created. The foundation operated from a converted barn that had become a hub of international activity. Patient advocates video conferenced with medical teams in 6 languages. Research data flowed between Millbrook Falls and major medical centers worldwide. Policy recommendations developed in their small-town office influenced healthcare legislation across multiple countries. But at its heart, their work remained rooted in the simple principle Sophia had taught him on that first day: everyone deserves to be seen as a complete person rather than a collection of symptoms or differences. "There's something I want to tell you," Sophia said as they settled on their front porch, swing reinforced to accommodate Marcus's weight, but sized to be comfortable for both of them. "What's that?" Earlier today, Dr. Kim called with the results from the Global Patient Advocacy Assessment. "Do you want to know how many people have been trained in our model over the past 5 years?" Marcus had stopped tracking the numbers months ago, finding that statistics couldn't capture the human impact of their work. "How many?" 47,000 patient advocates across 63 countries. The ripple effect of what we started here has touched nearly 500,000 patients and their families. The numbers were staggering, but what moved Marcus most was imagining 47,000 conversations where patients had learned to advocate for themselves. 47,000. Moments when someone who felt like a monster discovered they were beautiful after all. And there's one more thing, Sophia continued, pulling out her phone to show him a video message. This came in today. The video showed Anya Petrov standing in a medical conference room in Prague, addressing a group of doctors in confident English. But she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a boy of perhaps 14, tall and awkward in the way that suggested ongoing growth spurts. "Hello, Mr. Marcus and Mrs. Sophia," Anya said to the camera. "I want you to meet my friend Pavel. He has Marfan syndrome and was hiding from school because the other children called him a freak. But I told him about giants who become advocates and teachers who see beauty in difference. Next month, Pavel and I are starting the first patient advocacy group in the Czech Republic." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes as he watched this confident young woman, once a frightened child in Geneva, passing on the same message of hope and empowerment that had transformed his own life. "She's using the exact words you used with her," Sophia observed. "Because the words work," Marcus replied. "Because truth is truth, whether it's spoken in Pennsylvania or Prague, anywhere else. People need to remember their worth." As they sat together in the comfortable silence of their front porch, watching the lights come on in the houses across Millbrook Falls, Marcus understood that this was what happily ever after actually looked like. Not a perfect ending, but an ongoing commitment to growth, service, and the daily choice to see beauty where others saw only difference. Their child would be born into a world where patients had voices, where medical care included compassion alongside treatment, where being different was recognized as a strength rather than a burden. It wouldn't be a perfect world, but it would be a world where transformation was possible for anyone willing to do the work of becoming their best self. "They call me a monster," Marcus said quietly, repeating the words that had once been his deepest shame. Sophia completed the thought that had become their shared truth. "Then I must be beauty." But now they both understood that those labels had never been opposites. They were simply different expressions of the same power, the power to change the world through choosing love over fear, inclusion over isolation, and hope over despair. In the end, that choice was available to everyone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.